You have two eyes, huh? Do you understand the game a bit? Yeah, have a look.
I'm not saying anything to you in particular because I know you're not too accurate with your reporting.
That's what you paid
so you're
for.
saying I should resign. So you're saying I should resign.
I think
that's
you should,
your opinion. Is that right?
That's my
okay,
opinion.
fine.
Are you going to resign then?
No, of course I'm not going to resign.
I simplify things next time.
Hello. Do not adjust your streams. There hasn't been an error. It is indeed a Mega Powers edition of the national curriculum. Yes, in the absence of Josh Parrish, Nick Dabano, and Nick Stoll, it falls to Ante Jukic and myself, Joey Lynch, to bring you this week's edition of the national curriculum. And yes, I will make the sacrifice and have to show up everybody else as the best host of the national curriculum. Ante, thank you very much for joining us on this Sunday evening. How are you?
The Mega Powers will not explode on this fine Sunday evening. Hello, everyone. Cometh the hour, cometh the good bloke. It's a pretty exciting time. I can't wait for I don't know. I'm kind of already swept up in it. I'm pretty excited for the next couple of days and for this show.
Just makes it, if we are the Mega Powers, Ante, who is our Miss Elizabeth? Miss Elizabeth. You got lust in your eyes for Miss Elizabeth.
Oh man, I'm unsure on that question. I know we're going to be styling out there tonight. So
hot dogging and our grandstanding.
You're definitely hot dogging and grandstanding after that. After you were basically saying you're going to show everyone up as the best host, so that's already covered. We've already got that down pat.
No, I don't get to host very often, Ante, so I'm getting my cup of coffee in the big time. Yeah. No, but moving on to serious business, the reason Australian football is on tenterhooks, it all comes down to this: Australia versus Peru, 90 minutes. At the end of it, or 120 minutes if things really get dramatic. One side will have booked a place at the 2022 World Cup, the pinnacle event in all of sports. The other side will have been consigned to watching it from their couches. There's a lot riding on it, Ante. I mean, can you feel the nervous energy? It feels like, we've seen an uptick in coverage, a bit more anxiety posting on various social media accounts. Can you feel the energy of this game?
I felt the energy. I started to feel the energy of this game after Will Swanton's article, because it was like real Australia started to notice that the Socceroos existed, and despite the NRI commentary, it was like, okay, this game matters, and this game matters more than any other, essentially since the Asian Cup final. This is huge with respect to what this game represents for this World Cup qualification phase, what it means for Australian football going forward. It really can't get any bigger than this. At the same time, though, I'm conflicted because there are a lot of things that I guess won't change in Australian football irrespective of the result, or remain as pertinent as ever irrespective of the result in terms of where Australian football should be going. So on that level, it is exciting, but even on a primary footballing level, it is really intriguing and exciting to see how Australia plays, how Australia adapts to Peru, especially after the UAE game. Yeah, I can't wait.
Well, I mean, we're already getting some feedback on the social media and the comments around the Mega Powers. Antonis bringing in, this might be a criticism about the panel's availability, but it's from the heart. run them memes. The pod's really fallen off since ESPN took over. No one shows up anymore. Maybe it isn't a coincidence that the only two ESPN contracted individuals on the pod actually have bothered to rock up for this one. No, we will be joined by Nick Dabano at some point during the show. He has just been hanging out. One of what looks to have been the very few people that went to watch North Melbourne versus Greater Western Sydney in the AFL. He will be joining us from the FNR studios as soon as he gets the chance to. So he will break down the game as soon as he can. But I think it has been an interesting. I found myself. I was driving around a bit today, and I kind of found myself just falling into like the sort of the fan mentality of, oh, she'll be right. We'll find a way. Like, surely it can't happen. Nah,
I don't know. I was thinking, as a fan, I always start to think like my mind gets itself in a tailspin over like scenarios and what happens if X plays, or what happens in a specific scenario. And so like it's crazy that we're not even on match day, and I'm already kind of trying to think about this essentially. Like this is weird, even from a personal perspective. This usually happens like when I wake up, and then like my mind starts racing essentially until kickoff. But yeah, I was really starting to think about it today. I obviously didn't get to have a cruise after because I was working on this fine Sunday. But it's really, really intriguing. Especially like this weekend, I've been able to really get stuck in to how Peru play, really get caught up, both over the qualification phase and, this recent friendly that they played against New Zealand as well. There's a lot that we have to discuss.
No, they're friendly against what is it, Danny Headshot and the New Zealand national team.
What a coach, guys! Wow, what a coach, Danny Headshot.
I think I have to predicate. I'm feeling like I've been falling into this trap of, oh, surely it'll happen. Like, surely it can't happen. Like, good things. I have to predicate that by saying, I am primarily an England fan. Who it is a national tradition that we go about 3 years talking about how crap we are. And then in the lead into any major game, it's like it's coming home mode.
Vibes take over, yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's weird. It's coming home is a joke for 95% of the time when you're an England fan, but then 5% of the other time you actually start to believe it. So I think I've entered it's coming home mode for the Socceroos in this sort of qualifier. But I think the reason that I'm getting just beginning to get a little nervous, a little more excited than I normally do surrounding the Socceroos, because I'm normally pretty good at being able to separate games that I'm working on versus being a fan sort of thing. It helps that, like I imagine you're a Croatia fan, I'm an England fan, so that sort of helps us with the process. But this, just because of what you said, this game is so huge. It is so important for Australian football. And I think it's also because as I've written in one of my preview pieces, there we go, Joey's cheap plugs first of the night, and I don't have Stoll or Josh or Nick to yell at me about it. I don't buy a lot of the copium that has been preemptively put forth surrounding the Socceroos missing out on a World Cup. Like, it's a wake up call. I don't think it's a wake up call for a few reasons. One, I don't think there's any lessons that Australian football needs to learn that require it to miss out on the World Cup to register them. I think I think like it could provide extra impetus, but there's also to an extent that like wake up call for who exactly? I mean, I've been you and I have been working and covering pretty much Australian football close to full time or something equivalent to it throughout this entire cycle. And it's been dominated by every stakeholder in this country talking about how the game's cooked and there's urgent needs to reform. Who exactly is left to wake up at this point? Like, and given that everybody already seems to be awake to the problems, who exactly do we want? Like, who are we expecting to ride in on, a white horse and save Australian football having been woken up in the event that the Socceroos do miss the World Cup. Everybody is already awake to the problems. Now, what happens is we might disagree with their interpretation of what needs to be fixed. So that's not that I think is so. Like, I don't think Australian football needs a wake up call. Everybody's already woken up. It's now figuring out what interpretation of what is broken is urgently required. And I don't think missing a World Cup necessarily will provide any clarity on that front. I think everybody's interpretation of what is wrong prior to this game will remain their interpretation coming out of this game.
I guess it's not necessarily a wake-up call, but I think how do I put this without saying that it's more likely Australia doesn't qualify? Like, I think essentially there could be something momentous from a period of catharsis, essentially. However, speaking on that wake up call already existing and whether people actually are awake to it is that's another subject for examination, because essentially this World Cup qualification phase as a whole has been a wake-up call for Australia, or for those who haven't been paying attention, essentially, because as I've mentioned as well, here we go for Arntest cheap plugs, but as I've mentioned over the course of this qualification phase, this qualification phase has essentially told Australian football's story on the pitch. Why we play the way we play, the decisions that we make, the players we value, the football we value, and the kind of things that we value in our football. That's all been blindingly apparent over the course of this qualification phase, specifically as the third qualification phase morphed into the proverbial pair. And this is where I come back to, I guess, the narrative of it's a good thing that Australia misses the World Cup. Like, I'm not necessarily, like, I'm not certain on that regard. I can see why it would be, but I don't believe that it would, let's say, initiate any substantial change that would actually make it a good thing. I think, but at the end of the day, like, I don't think tomorrow's or Tuesday morning's result against Peru, substantially changes things. I think what's on the table and what's been apparent over the course of this qualification phase has already been there and is already it's already apparent, and there is that apparent need for rectifying that. I don't think Tuesday really transforms that in any respect.
I think my mindset is that even in the event that if the Socceroos were defeated by Peru on Tuesday morning, we saw put in place a massive wave of reformation that fixed the country's footballing system perfectly. We started doing everything great. I still don't think it would be that a good thing, because you're supposed to qualify for the World Cup. The entire purpose of fielding a national team is to win the World Cup, essentially. Every single member of FIFA, if they don't, they should have a plan. How are we going to create a team that can go on and win the World Cup?
Coming back to that. Oh, sorry. Just to get back to that Johnny Warren, paraphrasing that Johnny Warren quote, when is it going to be that Australia is going to win World Cups as opposed to just qualifying and taking part? When is that going to happen, essentially? And this was a question that was apparent even coming into the last World Cup, and the difficulties that were faced there, even going into 2014. I mean, these are things that have been long evident under the surface. But sorry to let you continue, Joseph.
Yeah, but I think, just to put it in a nutshell, my perspective is that missing a World Cup is never a good thing. You can polish up a turd however much you want. You can polish that thing until it shines, but it will remain a turd. Missing the World Cup, no matter how much copium is huffed, no matter what you do in the aftermath, in and of itself is never a good thing. And I think that's what my mindset is heading into this one.
I guess you can
make the best of it, but it's never a good thing in and of itself.
I guess the only lamentable thing is that the copium has been put out there to the Australian footballing populace from both internal and external actors. That's probably the one lamentable thing, and people, that's it's almost it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in that respect, because and ultimately the question I have is like, where is this desire for improvement coming from? Is it coming from a desire to improve, or a desire for Australian football to get better, or is it a desire for Australian football to, or a desire for people within Australian football to show how smart they are? I think I guess that's the main question going forward for Australian football. Like, who has the best interests of the game at heart, and who is willing to put their own personal interests before that, or behind that? I guess time will tell.
I mean, putting your predictions hat on and say Socceroos have unfortunately lost in the after and are now staring down the barrel 4 years before the next World Cup. What narrative do you think wins out? So not the one you would prefer to see win out. What one do you think actually wins out?
We don't have the cattle, because that's been put out there from, like I said, that's been put out there from internal and external sources, essentially, and that will be something that ultimately manifests. But that would, again, coming back to this, I don't think that necessarily changes whether Australia win or lose. That narrative, however questionable or dubious it is, will still exist. Like, not to say questionable or dubious, but how legitimate a sentiment is it? Because, like we've discussed over the course of this qualification phase, there is, the element of utilization, or the dynamic of utilization, has been far more primary than the quality of the players, especially against an opponent like Peru, with Gareca, using his side in a far more practical means than Graham Arnold has, arguably.
I feel as though, like, it could very much be that the cattle might not prove to have been good enough. However, we haven't really been put in a position to properly assess that, because said cattle hasn't been utilized to the best possible way that they could have. If they had been deployed in a manner that maximized their strengths and they still wouldn't good enough, the cattle argument would carry more weight. But we haven't seen that. So to simply blame the cattle is an incomplete picture. Thing is, I think I can easily see, in a hypothetical aftermath where the Socceroos are defeated, we'll get a lot of people coming out, and everybody will have their own pet issue as to why this has happened. Cattle isn't there. AIS was closed. We need
they have no ticker.
Yeah, no ticker. Place don't had it. A lot of back in my day talk, but also stuff around national second division, lack of investments in the A leagues, need more A leagues teams. We need, and I'm not going to come out right now. It's for later podcast episodes where we can come out and start to assess the merits of all of these things. I'm not saying any of them are right or wrong right now, but it's not just one thing, is it? It's to steal one of the corporatisms that goes around so often. It's an ecosystem, and most of it needs attention, I think, moving forward. I think that's and that can be fixed in time, and it can be you can paper over the cracks, so to speak. I don't think Peru, in the event that they beat Australia, should just be happy with the situation going on in their homeland with the state of their league and all of that sort of stuff. But I don't know. It's a complicated issue, and I don't know. I think I agree with spot on as per from our friend Shane Earl that the cattle was good enough to qualify ahead of it, and I absolutely agree with this. I mean, draws with Oman and China. I'm yet to find. I would challenge anybody to stare me in the eye and say that the cattle wasn't there to beat China. Or even Saudi Arabia in that first game at Bank West when they started like a house on fire in the rain.
Yeah, but I remember writing after that Saudi Arabia game, it was like after the initial wave of energy, like Australia were essentially lost when the game slowed down, and this was a repeat dynamic, especially over the second half of this of that third qualification phase. But speaking on the cattle, quote unquote, this is why utilization becomes key, because in moments like this, you restrict yourself from a standpoint of options and flexibility, because ultimately you think about this game and this squad within this game, or within the context of this game, and you start to think, okay, who can make an impact in X scenario? Who can come off the bench in this scenario in the event Australia needs to go for a win, or Australia needs to come back from a losing position, or or what happens in the event that Australia needs to defend the lead? Like, what? I guess that's probably a less complicated question to answer than it would be with if Australia needed to chase a game or chase a result, essentially. But this is where utilization matters in earlier phases, because when the proverbial push comes to shove, you start to understand the legitimacy of individuals and their usage in games like this. However, to use an example, Attilio is a practical solution in a game like this. But because he hasn't really been used in this environment, does it seem practical to play him in that environment? Because you are now, you're conditioned by the idea, will the occasion get to them? Or a genre, for example, how they the fact that they haven't really been properly utilized, haven't been able to maximize what they can do and what they're best at. Does that make them a legitimate option or alternative in a game like this, in a scenario where Australia needs to chase a result or chase a game or work its way back from a losing position in a game like this? What happens in a scenario where that happens? What happens in a scenario where Australia needs to chase a game? How are they going to chase the game? And how functional or how practical are those decisions, when weighing up pros and cons of each? It's enough to turn your brain into scrambled egg, but it's a really tricky one when you start to really, examine the usage of players over the course of this qualification phase. That's why I'm really, really intrigued to see what happens on Tuesday morning.
Indeed. Well, we have begun to touch on it, so we probably should start talking about the football match that awaits us at some point. Socceroos versus Peru. We will start with the side that has our hearts heading into this game, Ante. The Socceroos, you and I were both in Graham Arnold's match day -1, or whatever what approximates at press conference that he just gave earlier this afternoon. What was your biggest takeaway from that press conference? Did you get any hints as to how he will deploy his troops for the coming game?
I did. You just get the impression that Arnold's going to revert to that 4-4-2 in both defensive and attacking senses, like he did against Japan and Saudi Arabia. Because when you consider how they played against Oman and Vietnam in the window beforehand, they were more assertive in the same way that they were against UAE. But even then, it was like a dipping of toes into the water, because that's just how it is in Australian football when things start to get a bit shaky and a bit volatile and a bit uncertain. And asking Arnold about that, he almost inadvertently conceded that he does react to the quality of the opponent instead of actually putting his team out there in a way that suggests he believes in them to be able to do things and to be able to win in a football match. And this was something that you was, to use an expression that you mentioned before we started recording. It was like you get the impression that Graham Arnold's going to turn this into a boxing match as opposed to a football match. And, I don't want it to turn into a cultural cringe, but do you want this to be a reflection of Australian sport and Australian football?
It's
because what does it reflect essentially?
It's like I'll respond to your comment now before going on to what I took from it's like that question. I think is a difficult one because you and I, and as well as everybody else on this show, have constantly decried results-based thinking and being driven by results. But a small part of, well, no, not a small part of me. There is a battle going on inside around, do I really care about how they win this game in particular, so to speak?
It matters. I think it matters.
I know, like that. Well, that's the battle that I've got going on internally. I know it matters, but at the same time, it's the World Cup. There's so much riding from it. Is this the ultimate footballing act of looking a gift horse in the mouth? If they qualify for a World Cup, the entire purpose of having that team by turning it into UFC, I don't even know what number they're up to now.
It was 275 this morning.
Yeah. Okay. So by turning it into UFC 276, it's a difficult one. But moving on to my take, and it's something I'm struggling with internally because it's hypocritical of me to think that way, but I just can't help it because it's the stakes associated with this one game in particular, the crystallization in focus that comes from a one and done knockout game, so to speak. But moving on to what I took from Arnie's presser, he was very muted. I think he wasn't bombastic as he has been in previous. I think, well,
compared to when he started.
Compared to when he started, or even compared to some of the other interviews that he's given this week, I'm estimating that maybe some at Football Australia perhaps saw the reaction that some of his comments on SEN, which we'll get to in a little bit, that the reaction that those comments elicited maybe got him to turn it down a little bit to not provide more ammunition. But from what I could gather, I think Fran Karacic starts at right back.
Yeah.
Based upon what he said when he was asked about the right back situation. I asked him about the striking situation, but he gave nothing. He gave nothing on that front. So very difficult to, I don't know, I guess, read into what he's going to do on that front. What I did take away, the question, I have absolutely zero doubt that Aaron Mooy is not capable of playing 120 minutes. He was given multiple opportunities to say he could go, and he wouldn't. So Aaron,
shout out to the old man.
I try to ask a question subtly about which players can't go 120 minutes, and then the old man just the end. Aaron Mooy, 120 minutes or not? Well, he had to work on his holiday, so all out of F's to give even before he started. So, those were some of the takeaways that I could extrapolate from the presser in a press conference environment that, really was lacking much in the way of detail. I mean, you mentioned your takeaway there from your question. You think we'll play with two 10s
and Hustich as a 10. Two sitting midfielders and Hustich as a 10, like we did against Japan and Saudi Arabia. I guess the only thing, with regards to the striker situation, it is, let's say, illuminative that Taggart is still only training individually. It would take a pretty momentous call, to throw him in if he is injured and hasn't really got onto as in full speed scrimmages and actually a proper training environment. And he was very was very effusive of Matthew Leckie and the job that he did as the striker for Australia against the UAE. You know, irrespective of the dynamics of that game, like just on Matthew Leckie's performance individually, he did. He was positive in that regard. So there is enough to at least hint that he would be going down the path of a Leckie, or I wouldn't rule out Duke. I wouldn't rule out Duke, but that would be in the event that he plays with two up front. You know, with the likelihood that that happens. So again, I'm uncertain, but I would be confident in saying that we'd likely see one of Leckie or Duke that starts with Rustic.
Indeed. I didn't do it deliberately, but I did, accidentally leave Mitch Duke out of the strikers that I name dropped in my question about attacking options. And Arnold's made a point to bring him up, which suggests some insight into his thinking. I think on the subject of, mentioned Taggart not really training with the main side, that is also the case, we're told, for Trent Sainsbury as well. So ostensibly easier to plug and play a defender than a striker, one would think, coming off little training time. But I get the vibes that we're not going to see Sainsbury against Peru either. And especially when you consider that heading into this game, Arnold has emphasised quite a lot time on the training track that he's had with this side and the importance of that. And whether that might just be for our benefit, but it very also likely could be that Arnold himself really does see the value in that and his ability to, teach these kids the Aussie DNA and all of that sort of stuff. So not that I think he doesn't think his own son-in-law doesn't have Aussie DNA, but he could be biased towards players that have spent the entire camp on the training track. So I think that even if Taggart and Sainsbury potentially could play, he might be biased towards, the likes of Rouse and Deganek that have been with the group the entire time.
But still, Moy represents a rather sizable elephant in the room, considering the lack of match minutes that he's had.
He's been training with Andrew Clark, aren't he? He's been training.
Yes. The fitness
he's been training with the national team. He's been training with the national team staff.
Yeah, but it's not the same as playing. It's not the same as playing.
I mean, you're not going to get the arguments from me on that.
Yeah,
front.
It's just not the same. And I mean, this is where, what does, in a footballing sense, what does experience mean in scenarios like this in relation to what the player does? Because, a player like Aaron Moy, I hate to go all office space, but what is it that you do here? It's strange when you really break down what each player does. Can experience be defined by essentially the consistency of their actions, and and whether that reflects an ability not to panic and to stay resilient. You kind of know what Aaron Moy is going to do, but that doesn't necessarily exhibit experience. That's just how the player is conditioned, no?
And just because you know what he's going to do doesn't mean he's necessarily going to do good things. You just know what those things are.
Yeah. And so that's why I come to that question over, psychological conditioning as opposed to experience. I don't this might be a very pedantic question to ask, but it's a tricky one in scenarios like this. But I guess the major dynamic in this, given what we have spoken about, with that all in mind, it's how does Peru approach this game? And because I guess the fitness status of Yosimari Otun has been questionable coming into this one, so that creates a lot of potential scenarios and alternatives for Gareca to go into. Does he play Gonzalez with the likes of Pena in front of a Tapia, who, because Tapia didn't play against New Zealand, but there is the likelihood that he will be inserted back into the starting 11, for this game. Or there is also the the reality that he could also go with two DMs basically and a Pena as a 10. So I guess there are a lot of unknowns. That's what makes this game such a Rubik's Cube to try and figure out.
I just wanted to come back to one thing you said there about psychological conditioning, Ante, and I think that's one of the reasons why you and I and a few others really emphasize junior coaching for like 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. That's when we're talking about that, when that psychologically conditioning of a player, the habits that they build up, and which is, and those age groups are arguably when these habits are really formed and set in, and it's incredibly difficult to change them after that period. And that is the time when, if a 12-year-old's always taught to bounce pass and never look upfield or do anything like that, it's basically turned into a P&P athlete as a 12-year-old. It's very hard to break that sort of mindset. So when we talk psychological conditioning versus experience, I think that's what we're talking about. You can get an experienced player, but if they were psychologically conditioned in one way, the relatively inexperienced player, but was still psychologically conditioned to thrive in environments, big-time environments, would still be a better choice. So that's what that sort of differentiation comes down to, I think.
Because that ultimately boils down to one's ability to adapt in scenarios.
Yeah.
And, that's, I guess that's, you do want a consistent footballer, but I guess just as important, you want an adaptable footballer and a flexible footballer, because ultimately Australian football, you can even watch the Oliveroos against Turkmenistan. We are Australian football teams are psychologically inflexible, and whether, they can succeed doing, simply more of the same doesn't necessarily denote, an improvement. And so that's why I come back to talking about the way that Australia goes about this game and qualification for the World Cup. That's why I do think it is so important and reflective of where we are in Australian football, considering what Australian football needs to do to improve. Because the players that we produce are ultimately a reflection of our coaches. And coming back to a comment that, or let's say a take that I put forth, in one of my articles, it was the issue was never Graham Arnold in isolation. It's always what Graham Arnold reflected or represented of Australian football and Australian football coaches, and how our coaches interpret the game. And that's what has made this qualification so precarious. And that's why, ultimately I'll be absolutely ecstatic if Australia wins and gets past, but it doesn't necessarily change the realities of Australian football and where Australian football needs to go from here after this World Cup. And it's cool of you that you were able to bring up, those really formative ages. Even, you can go back to even earlier, like let's say your 7, 8, 9-year-olds. How do you impart in them a way to play? And I think there is, because ultimately we have to, I guess, talk about solutions. We can't talk about problems all the time. What are the solutions for these problems? And I think that is one of the significant, let's say, dynamics that Australian football has to improve upon. What kind of football do we want our kids at those formative ages to play? How do we want them to interpret the game on an individual level? How do you enable them to be able to be flexible decision makers on a footballing pitch, which then provides that basis for their development going forward? Because if you can't, to use a quote from the mother tongue, So I'll translate it into English. But if you don't learn the alphabet at an early age, you're going to mumble and you're going to mumble and stumble with your words for your whole life. And that's what essentially happens with the footballers that we create, which then, conditions the footballers that we value coming into A-League academies. Like, this ultimately is not a problem isolated to this is not a problem isolated to the Socceroos. This is an endemic issue that exists within Australian football. And this is something that ultimately can only really be solved, on a generational basis.
It's why also I take issue with people saying the AAS will fix everything. Yes, the AAS would work as a finishing school for about 30 to 35 kids.
Yeah.
But you're not going to fix, the way kids are taught in the years before that, and the thousands upon thousands of other kids that don't get to go to the AAS are still going to face into the same problems. And I think what you're getting at there, Ante, specifically, it gets to one of the things as Arnold is the realization of this, it gets to one of the things that I like to say: multiple things can be true at once. One can absolutely take issue with the way that Arnold has coached this side during this World Cup cycle, whilst simultaneously acknowledging all the systemic issues that have gone into creating this perfect storm. I don't think it's one or the other. I mean, even if one did want to blame Cattle, multiple things can be true at once. You can also, look at Arnold's utilization of that Cattle. I think that's something important to acknowledge. But looking at the game, Ante, you've said that you anticipate they'll play with two deep-lying midfielders and more one advanced one. I'm imagining you think Hrustic will be the advanced one. We all saw how that worked against Japan. So, yeah. But who do you think the two deep-lying midfielders? Well, I'll ask you two questions. One, who do you think Arnold will deploy as the two deep-lying midfielders? And who would you deploy as the two deep-lying midfielders?
Who I think Arnold would deploy as the two deep-lying midfielders would be Moy Irvine. What I wouldn't want two deep-lying midfielders at all. I think Peru can be pressed, and I think I think you can hurt Peru in both defensive and attacking senses without two deep-lying midfielders. The idea, but again, this is I guess a conditioning of how Arnold's teams defend. Arnold's teams don't necessarily press. They're a team that really likes to sit in a low or mid block, and that's something. Speaking of an endemic dynamic with Australian football, that's how teams in the A-League defend. How many teams in the A-League press? 3, really, 2 or 3. Before Newcastle, it was pretty much only City and Adelaide. Everyone else really sat low or mid block, and they kind of waited for mistakes, essentially. That's the thing about this Peru, when talking about their practicality, they, against teams like that, they do improvise, and they do have that quality. And that was something that was actually really, really striking about Arnold's press conference today. I'm not sure if you remember it, but he said that they were very disciplined, but also very all over the place. And I understood it straight away, because this is essentially what he's talking about, because they do have certain structures in place, in possession, but they do have a lot of players who like to, I guess, take the game as it comes to them, and provide solutions to the game as it happens before them. So it's going to be very interesting if we don't press against Peru, how we're able to get out against them and create a territory game. I'm not necessarily certain a defensive approach would be conducive in that regard.
Well, I mean, you talked on our post UAE wrap-up show about how you would consider bringing in Riley McGree for Jackson Irvine in your midfield. So, having watched Peru, is that how do you maintain that view? Would you start with a midfield of Moy as the deep-lying midfielder with Riley McGree and Hrustic as a more advanced pairing in front?
Yeah, I think it would theoretically there is scope for such a thing, and the same applies to Genre, because he's the thing about genre, especially in such a chaotic game, he does have that ability to be flexible and to be adaptable and to be able to, and because the thing about adaptability essentially in football is like how quickly can you respond and improvise as the chaos happens around you. That's probably one of the main areas that genre excels in, and that's right, because the brain is always the quickest muscle. And in a game like that, he would be able to find the ball in certain spaces that are penetrative, because it would create a chaotic game. Essentially, the question is like, do you want to embrace the chaos or do you want to minimize the chaos? And as we've always kind of seen with Arnold, it's his thinking and his decision making has always been geared towards the latter.
Well, Arnold spoke during the week about needing to get into the face of the Peruvians, get physical and knock them off their game. It sort of sounds like, from what you're saying, he sort of got the right idea, but he's going about it the wrong way. He's talking about physicality, knockout, drag down. You're talking about an active press and how you get in somebody's face in a footballing context. Do you think the Peruvians can be attacked in that fashion?
Yes, they can. Because they, like I said, they when Arnold said that they're disciplined and all over the place at the same time, it's like, yeah, that applies, but the divergence lies within, like you said, how you tend to approach that. And I can only say it from a theoretical basis. I don't have skin in the game, and skin in the game usually creates battle scars. But the ultimate mark of a human is their ability to kind of embrace that risk in the face of ardor, in the face of difficulty and adversity. And that's probably been one of the main let's say sticking points with Arnold from a heuristic basis as a coach.
Well, there we go. Ante Jukic and Graham Arnold in alignment on some interpretations of Peru, vastly different in other interpretations of Peru. But we've spoken about the Socceroos a lot. Now I guess we can look in a bit more detail about the Peruvians. I'm sure by now most of our viewers on the stream and our listeners on the podcast will have heard a bit about the Peruvians. Been together a long time. They get the most out of their players on the park. They bring, as the Guardian, through the form of Pedro Canelo, said they bring the eye of the tiger, thanks to Coach Ricardo Gareca's nickname as the Tiger. I thought it was really interesting just reading up on this bloke, just about how he basically kicked off the dark age for Peru by scoring that late equaliser for Argentina that forced them into a qualifier with Chile that they lost. So I thought that was interesting. But you've watched some of the games, Ante, so I'll ask you first, what was your immediate reaction to the Peruvian style and the way they go about it after watching those games?
Like I'm pretty familiar with them, but it was more from a sense of freshening up on how they play. And I touched on that divergence between Gareca and Arnold, and he he wants his teams to play, and they are a practical team in that respect. They do look to improvise, and they insist with certain passes. I'll put it that way. They'll try to reward certain runs and try to reward certain decisions, from a positional standpoint. And like I said, in a game or against an approach like Australia's defensively, like there is scope for that kind of thing. That's why it can get, I'm very intrigued to see how it plays out, because Australia can, if they can maintain territory against them, there is a means to which Australia can hurt them. The big one obviously is Tapia coming back, because he'll usually sit, as their defensive midfielder. Yotun and his fitness is another major dynamic, because that ultimately conditions how Gareca will play. I think we're more likely, or from what I've heard among Peruvian colleagues, is that he's more likely to stick with a 4-3-3, with a sitting midfielder, even in the event that Yotun is injured and unable to take part, because it would be very interesting to see who he goes with as well, because as a result, that incorporates the likes of Christian Cueva or Lapadula as well, and it's one thing that's really cool actually about them is that I'm not necessarily this is not to sound like I'm gushing about them or anything, but there's a layered approach to how they play, specifically since Lapadula came in, and they do like to put a lot of numbers around the ball and keep short distances, but then Lapadula is able to keep the defensive line stretched because of how he the runs he makes off the ball. So it's, like I said, it's a pretty cool and pretty out of the box layered approach. Ultimately, that impacts both the territorial and the positional dynamics of the game against a team like Australia, because it'll ultimately condition the positions in which Peru's midfielders can receive the ball, because they do like to play through their midfield quite a bit, especially in comparison to, you look at, they are such a contrast to teams like a Chile or a Colombia, who they qualified ahead of in CONMEBOL qualification. Chile, ever since Valdivia's retirement, they have been, a meat and two veg football team. And Peru have been very different to that, irrespective of, the NRI that they might not have in comparison to those nations such as, Chile and Colombia. So, it's they play some good stuff. And so it won't be simple for Australia. But at the same time, there is enough there for Australia to hurt them. So, this is like we said at the top, I'm just really, really intrigued and really excited to just watch this game as a football fan, let alone as an Australian or as a media member in Australian football. So, I can't wait.
Because I remember a lot of talk as CONMEBOL qualifying wore down around some people actively sort of rooting for Peru to get into that slot over the likes of Colombia and Chile, which I thought was interesting because, knowing I must admit I don't watch South American football as much as you do, Ante, but from what I knew about Peru and the way they went about it and, how they play, it sounded like they were probably the least best matchup for the Socceroos out of all those fringe South American sides. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, well, you think about it. You compare, this kind of proposition to playing Chile at the Confederations Cup in 2017. In that post Valdivia, period, and how they were starting to become a very conventional team in possession, and how that enabled Australia to press them in high areas. I could live with a Chile or a Colombia, as a reactive team, essentially, if we were to play reactively against a team like that, because, you can ultimately say, okay, well, let your best player or your highest NRI player try and figure it out against us. Let him go. And, you could live with that scenario. Whereas against the Peru, there are a lot of, it's more like a death by 1,000 cuts as opposed to, one single hammer blow from their highest NRI player, which is usually the case in CONMEBOL qualification. So, I know looking back, I wasn't big on this matchup, but at the same time, you can still see that light at the end of the tunnel, irrespective of, the navel gazing that exists, that it has existed over the course of this qualification phase for Australia.
Well, Laz has left a comment every time I hear Lapadula's name. All I can think of is All I can think of is Tiziano Crudeli. We are supposed to be joined by Nick DeMano on the stream in a few minutes, so I might
Let us
wait
just
until
say,
he.
Cat Volpato, Cat Volpato, Cat Volpato. Let's see if he comes straight away. I hope it works.
If he did appear, if he appears within the next 60 seconds, that'll be we're running that joke into the grounds. But I might wait until he joins us as our resident Italian football expert before we get into Lapadula. Arguably the player with the biggest NRI on the Peruvian national side, has only been playing for them since about 2020. You know, born in Italy, has a Peruvian mother. Only joined. Thank you to Alan Riley for joining in the Cat Volpato. Run them memes informing us that we didn't say it in front of a mirror, so it doesn't count.
Hold on, we've got our black mirrors here. Let's.
Lapadula, son of a Peruvian mother, only joined Peru really when it became apparent that Italy wasn't happening for him. So who knows? Maybe there is parallels there with Volpato. Maybe we'll see him eventually once it becomes apparent, if it becomes apparent. Yes, there we go, Antonis joining in, getting on my line of thinking as well. Oh, good Lord. But Ivan has also left us the comment, a bit late to the stream, but what did we make of New Zealand's game against Peru? New Zealand coached by, as we said, Danny Headshot. In that game, it was a 1-0 victory to the Peruvians. Lapadula with a 69th minute strike. Nice. To secure the win for the Peruvians in Spain, actually. That has been one of the things that I've noted in the build-up to this thing, to the extent that acclimatization will be any benefit in this game, given that Qatar have the air-conditioned stadiums and whatnot. Maybe Australia does have the advantage in that sense, given that they just have been in Qatar and that time zone longer than the Peruvians, although I think that difference is going to be negligible. But it's something worth noting. I'll look like a genius if it turns out to be the deciding factor.
Don't forget that there is also a rather large Peruvian community in Spain.
Diaspora, it's huge.
Yeah, it's massive. And so
and Italy as well, and they've all gone to Qatar.
Yeah, specifically in Barcelona and Madrid, there are rather sizable Peruvian communities there. So that was but on the game itself, on that New Zealand game, I can see it. I can see from a standpoint of complexion, there is let's say a possibility that it plays out in a similar fashion. With respect to territory and, how Australia tried to, I guess, hurt Peru, and Peru trying to essentially unlock, that mid block. So yeah, I can see it playing out in very similar circumstances. That was probably, that's pretty good preparation from Peru's part. I will say that, they have picked a pretty similar opponent ultimately.
Cousins from across the Tasman, and we should also note that New Zealand also have a do or die playoff coming up. They will be taking on Costa Rica in the early hours of Wednesday morning. Oceania versus North America / the Caribbean for a slot in the World Cup. I've done absolutely zero research on that game. Who you got? Costa Rica. I'm just padding for time until
you know what? I'm not ruling out New Zealand, man.
I don't think I've been ruling out New Zealand based purely off NRI.
No, not even from a standpoint of NRI. Costa Rica very conventional in possession, so there is scope for New Zealand to essentially break it down into a counter / dead ball scenario, and they do have dead ball threats, both in aerial and ball striking senses. It's almost like Bill Tuoloma scores a header from a dead ball every week in the MLS. It'll be interesting to see the MLS. But look, I can say that because I watch the MLS rather regularly. But yeah, I can see a scenario where the All Whites get up. It'd be pretty cool to see both Australia and New Zealand there.
No, it would be very interesting. And I'm seeing a comment from an ESPN employee, so I'm honor bound to put that up on the screen. Laurie Haresh asking, what can we make of the fact that live members haven't dropped despite certain co-host current availability or lack thereof?
Well.
It's interesting. Because you got the mega powers. The mega powers are a draw, baby.
Money.
Cue the sex jazz music. The mega powers explode.
Coming back to the football, however,
I didn't even need that. I didn't even read that comment before I put it up. So that was a fantastic surprise. I just put it up because it was an ESPN employee.
Lovely. Shout out to Laurie. Yeah. I thought it was just going to be a solo show after the stream just cut out for a second. It was I can see New Zealand getting up. Yeah. I reckon these playoffs are just going to be, as football matches, I think they're just going to be exciting. They're going to be worth watching. Because, this is a very on-brand comment, but like, seriously, nothing beats international football. Even the Nations League has been fun. Irrespective
invigorating
of the fact that,
0-0 draws against Italy.
Hey.
I know.
The only goal that England has scored in three games in the Nations League has been via the penalty spot in the 88th minute. Like Harry Kane, but what a player, man! Wow, what a player!
He's saying that unironically, ladies and gentlemen. Harry Kane's actually a good player.
I love Harry Kane, man. But anyway.
I
international football. I love Harry Kane. He's a good player. Like, I reckon Italy. Did you hear how he said Italy could win?
Italy made the World Cup. I love that.
Anyway, international football is the best. New Zealand, Costa Rica is going to be fun. It's going to be cool to just watch an international game and like not have skin in the game after Tuesday. Whatever happens, like win or loss. We progress or don't. It's just going to be fun to watch New Zealand, Costa Rica anyway.
Well, we have been going over an hour now, just the two-man Mega Powers edition. Run Them Memes is asking us though. He's hoping that your dad shows up again. Ante can share some of his wisdom, but
only both our if both our dads are on this show, then maybe.
Oh well, I got to say, Hold on. Cap Valpardo.
Live from FNR.
It's at the we're at the old TNC studios, guys. We're going heritage round
back in the hood.
The pre-Debano TNC days. The pre-Debano and the pre-Stolich TNC days.
The OG TNC, man.
The Jurassic era. What are we talking? We're talking fucking ancient era right now. I can't even think, fellas.
The pre-XG era, Jurassic.
Yeah, I've literally ran in the rain from the bottom end of Marvel Stadium on Burke Street, where you come out from that service end, all the way up to Docklands Drive just to get here on time. I'm fucking puffed. I'm drenched. It's cold.
Man, I've got to edit the podcast stream in the absence of Josh. Do I have to beep him dropping an F-bomb? I don't like. I legit.
Well, just use the audio because I'm not. I haven't even got Audacity up because I was in that much of a rush. So,
hey, Loz, could you drop a comment if I need to beep out his F-bomb?
Yeah. So I don't know, but we made it. Sorry, got to take off my Alpha accreditation as well. But we'll move that to just the side. So how are we all, guys? We're all good.
Hold on. We've got a comment from Antonis. Is that the scene of the fateful Italy video? Is it? Just to refresh everybody's memory, this is the fateful Italy video.
Oh, Madonna, you got to bring that up. I'm upset. I'm so upset. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, it's right. It's right over to my left, behind that panel desk over there, is the fateful scene of my Italy video. Yes.
Well, no, but we have been waiting for you, Nick Debano, as our resident Italian football expert, Lapadula.
Oh yeah,
down for us,
mate. I'm not gonna lie. I have had this like love for Lapadula going back to when I was like 17. Like I remember him Like I'm talking like year 11
Man,
Italian.
you're
This-
young
no,
as
this is-
hell. That's not exactly that
Yeah.
long ago. Though.
So I was like 17. No, yeah, 17 turning out. It was like VCE days. And me and one of my old mates in Italian, he was a big Pescara fan. And that's when they were in Serie B. And he was telling me, mate, there is this guy called Gianluca Lapadula who is an absolute baller in Serie B. And I'm like, oh, yeah, whatever. Watched him once, fell in love, right? Just fell in love with him. Just vibes, man. He looked just had such a good, like, exuberance about him. It was a good story, literally come from nowhere. Scored, I think, 25 goals in Serie B that season, was on fire. And then Milan signed him. So it was like, if we're going to be bleeping out F-bombs, like F and oath, like this is an amazing signing, considering that was like Milan's record signing that transfer window as well, because like they could not spend. And I remember like thinking, oh, geez, like this is how bad Milan's gotten now.
This
That
is
our
the
big
Banter era,
signing
man.
is
Like the depths of the Banter era.
Yeah. But no, like Lapadula, I actually like really liked him at Milan, not for what he really did on the field, but just because like he just loved to be there. And it was like every day for him was like, oh my God, I'm playing for bloody Milan. And he knew that he wasn't supposed to be here. And he is anyway. And he signed like a 5-year deal. He played for a season, scored a couple crucial goals. They sold him when they signed the Magnificent Eight, Ante, those famous days of Bonucci, and they signed Nikola Kalinic and Andre Silva. So the writing was on the wall, and he got offloaded, which he was actually like really emotional after he got sold. And I think he went to Genoa from memory, I think it was. But then he sort of meandered around the scene in Serie A and Serie B, come up with Lecce, played a few games. Then obviously now he's playing for Peru because he was never going to play for Italy, let's be real. And he has his Peruvian mother. Look, he's a lot of vibes. He's very quick. Like he's a very fast striker. He does well in counter-attacking situations. So if we're going to have more of the ball and we're going to get hit on the break, forget about it, especially if Bailey Wright and Kai Rolls is the centre-back partnership. Because he's very quick. He's very physical for a small guy as well. Like he likes to get stuck in, show a bit of grinta. That's what we love to see, if we're talking Italian football. But
Italian DNA, you say?
Yeah, he's got the Donde sta Anna there. Yeah, he's definitely got it. So he's not Paulo Guerrero, right? He's not that level of vibes, but he's a decent player, especially if we're going to have more of the ball and they're going to hit us on the break. We're going to be potentially in trouble because he's a good striker in that instance. If I was to probably make one comparison in the way he plays, actually, I don't know if this is really, because he does work harder than Jamie McLaren, but he's good in the box in terms of his like getting in the right positions, but he does work harder than him. That's one thing for certain. So look, you know what? We're going to have our hands full with him in transition. But I think if they have more of the ball, I think we'll be able to potentially stifle his impact. But for me, like I just love seeing him play for Peru. I have a soft spot for Lapadula. I'm not going to lie. It's a good story. It's a good football story. So on Tuesday, I'll be rooting against him. But yeah, there's something there. He's a player to definitely look out for because they don't have as many of those attacking weapons as they used to have, like with Guerrero. And I'm pretty sure Carrillo's playing, but with Jefferson Farfan as well. So he's one player to definitely keep an eye on. He's probably one of the more dangerous players.
Well, you brought up Jamie McLaren there and run them memes off in the comment. Nick McLaren, right on time for a podcast tap in, joining over an hour after we've begun. Also, Antonis leaving the comment. Is the member for Milan aware of the member for Milan?
Oh, it's different though. It's different. It's different. Lapadula's like 30, 31. Like he waited. Like how much more patient do you have to be for an Italian national team call up? Like it was never going to happen. I'm pretty sure he was close. Like when he was playing for Pescara at the time, like he got pretty close considering where Italy were at the time. Like 2016, that time was not we remember what happened before that. That was the start of, the Ventura era. So he was close, but like
they're going much better now, aren't they, Nick? Having missed the World Cup.
Well, they won the Euros in between that, so I guess it's something. But yeah, look, I think that he definitely made the right decision and going to play for Peru, man. Like they're close to playing for they're close to playing another World Cup. Like they made it in 2018. Why wouldn't you want to go there, especially if you're going to be the number one guy?
So, and as Antonis points out, so he's more similar to a cum dog then.
He's more like he's more like, to make a local comparison, he's more like an Arena.
In terms of the way he plays?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like someone, and you were talking about, how he works off the ball, especially within, the context of this Peruvian team, he's more, especially in phases where Peru have the ball or a dominating possession. He's more used as a means to stretch the defensive line and allow for space to others to go into. And and he's still capable of providing the touch here and there to be able to combine and incorporate the rest. Especially midfielders trailing from advanced, from the advanced position that he retreats to. So yeah, like he fits, and Gareca utilizes him in a way that essentially gets the best out of him. So yeah, he's fun to watch in that respect. Really good to watch, Michael.
Well, actually, just going back, he actually did get called up once for the Italian team, but didn't play. So he was sort of a last-minute injury replacement in 2016. Just going back here, and then in 2020, he just accepted the call-up when they got close to Copa America. Hey, he scored 3 goals in Copa America as well last year. It's one thing to keep an eye on. But Ante, the other thing as well, which is about him, he's very physical and very much has a high temperament. So he's one player that you can expect, if there's going to be, this will make headlines, it's going to be Lapadula getting stuck in and maybe having a bit of S-housery, because he is that kind of guy who's not afraid to sort of get in the face of players and put a bit of a big challenge in. He's definitely one to keep an eye on.
Well, on the subject of getting in people's faces and S-housery, as it were, and indeed on the subject of Lapadula's Peruvian DNA, allowing him to represent the side of his mother. DNA. Aussie DNA. We went into a little bit of this on our reaction show to the results against the UAE, but it must be addressed. In the lead into this game against Peru, Graham Arnold gave an interview to Andy Marr and Andrew Gaze on SEN. And one of the quotes that he gave has caused a particular stir. I will read it out. It's been transcribed by Simo_Melb89 on Twitter. I did check it and it is accurate, so I feel comfortable in reading it out. Arnold's quote: "Our best chance is the Aussie DNA. If the boys run, fight, kick against the South Americans and really play a physical game, I believe that type of thing will rattle those type of nations. The South American style is they like to play an attractive style of game. They're very technically, individually very good, but we've got to get in their faces. We've got to make a fight of this, a war of this, and make sure that when we go out on the pitch that we rattle them. When we do that, that's our best chance." I will throw this open. Ante Jukic, Nick DeBarno, who wants to go first?
All I want to say is, has Arnie been listening to Mick Moldhouse's Anzac Day speech? He came when he went back to Collingwood and said, treat this like it's World War I when you're out there. Like, very odd. But again, as we spoke about on Tuesday, we're going back to the well with these DNA comments. Like, come on. And some of them as well are quite contrary in terms of stuff he said earlier in the piece. Like, we're talking way back when he said, we want to play beautiful football like Liverpool and score a lot of goals and all that sort of stuff. Now he's talking a lot about, having to kick players and be physical and, show, grunt and get in the faces. I can't anymore. I don't know what to say anymore about that. But Ante, go for it, mate. Floor's yours.
I mean, I guess what conditions that interview is the fact that he's not going to, I guess, he's not going to be on a short leash in an interview like that, because essentially what are Gaze and Marr going to really examine in terms of what Arnold is saying? So he's able to, essentially go off cliches and false truths. Because we were even talking about it on this very podcast, that Peru are different to Chile and Colombia, where they're tidy, but they're not exceptional on a technical basis. I mean, shit, like, it's just such a. I don't want to be too disparaging given the environment in which the interview was conducted in, because it is Gaze and Arnold. And so would he feel comfortable getting away with saying essentially bullshit like that? Because that's what it is. Like, and then to now, I wrote about this. Character in football is not solely defined by effort. And this is something that has been palpably true of Australian football, or reflected by Australian football over this World Cup qualification phase. And, you know, he would probably say it in much more massage terms, but Arnold would still kind of use a similar sentiment in a different environment. I guess how blunt would he be is the question.
It's interesting talking about. I look at this. It doesn't. I mean, it's not when you actually dive down and, you know, across the whole interview as well. Some of the other things that Arnold said surrounding players not knowing how to hurt because there's no relegation in the A-League men. Ignoring the fact that Arnold's entire resume and case for being able to coach this Socceroos was success in the A-League men competition as it currently stood. And, you know, his comments surrounding that, or his comments surrounding coaches only being as good as the players that they have at their disposal. Like, it doesn't, you know, not if you actually dive into a lot of those comments, it's not too, you know, what's the word, generous towards his own squad. Like, it doesn't speak a lot to, if one was to only, you know, base one's judgment off the Socceroos squad off that interview, one wouldn't come away with a very generous appraisal of the Socceroos' abilities.
Well, sorry,
No, go ahead.
Sorry to interject, but we were talking about the presence of cattle and the and the pushing out of that narrative from internal factors. Well, we have our national team coach saying that, and it's a pretty sizable indictment of Australian coaches that it does come to this, you know, when it gets tricky. And that the knee-jerk response is to fight and scrap and get stuck in and not actually play football.
Like, it has always intrigued me. Like, there you can field, they've become increasingly less common as the cycle has gone on that I've noticed, but you can field comments surrounding undue negativity surrounding the Socceroos when you take issue with this cattle narrative. It's not really undue negativity. You're going into bat for the players, saying that the players are good enough in these situations. I don't think it's undue negativity. I think it's taking issue with the negativity being sprung on one party involved in the Socceroos, and, you know, where it's not. And the Homer legend says, "Hey guys, hey the Homer legend, big waves." So yeah, like it's. And like Nick, you're right. It does contrast wildly with the bombacity that characterized Arnold's approach to taking on the role. And I mean, I don't think he's actually been involved with that science of belief bloke for a long time now. But, you know, there was that sort of the approach at the start. I believe this will be the greatest Socceroos team ever. And I mean, there was a widespread, you know, I mean, during the World Cup cycle, I remember, you know, it wasn't just Arnold saying that. I remember, you know, people tweeting about how this was one of the greatest Socceroos sides they've ever seen. Like, it's remarkable how quickly opinions have changed, particularly those from Graham Arnold, though, and the change in tone that has taken place. I mean, one can understand why, but it's just, you know, we've got memories, and, you know, Arnold said in that interview that he doesn't pay attention to the criticisms of keyboard warriors. Well, it's not really a keyboard warrior move to just use Google to find quotes from 4 years ago and put them on the record again, I think.
What's that quote from? It's from Seneca.
If you allow what other people say about you to affect you, it's your problem, not theirs. And that is essentially what Graham Arnold is doing. He can talk about people who criticize him all he wants, but he's clearly affected by it. And so, you know, that speaks more to his own psyche than that of, you know, the criticisms of others, especially in relation to how his team plays. And so, you know, like, ultimately it validates criticism.
Well,
Well-
when the hashtag, well, Joey, when the hashtag streak came to an end, it's funny how the opinions changed. It's funny how when Australia started actually playing teams that weren't Asian minnows and teams that actually had an idea how to beat Australia, especially as we saw in some of those losses and teams just playing Australia to a T, how the narrative changed. And people quickly changing as the wind changes. Like it has been changing here in Melbourne, been so gusty. It's like some people's opinions in the soccer Twitter sphere. But anyways, it's a story for another day.
But it's like you talk about
No,
not
it
just
isn't.
facing it, but one could argue that it wasn't just not playing Asian minnows. You could just argue that it was results finally catching up with performances. As we said, Oman and China, they're not Asian powers, but the results finally began to reflect the performances that were being put in. I think.
Well, it's more the stats padding in that first round of qualifying against, what was it, Chinese Taipei,
Nepal.
all those teams, like Nepal, and they won twice against them all. So how many wins is that? Is that like 8 wins, 10 wins?
6.
Made up basically the 75, 80% of the streak. And then they had those first few results at the start. And then when, they got tested after that Japan game, we saw what happened.
Well, Lazar11 coming through with a comment on the YouTubes. Who's ever watched more than half a second? Yes, I did deliberately pronounce it that way before you all start laughing. Of South American football and gone, nah, they're not up for a scrap. You see, I'm hosting now, Nick and Ante, so I've got to avoid you breaking out into laughter by at the pronunciation of some of my words. But listen, we've been going an hour and 20 about the Socceroos game. We're going to do another episode on the Tuesday after that game has concluded. So we will be coming at you with more takes on that. But Socceroos, not the only thing happening in world football. But before I move us on to other things, Nick Debano, Ante Jukic, any final thoughts before the Socceroos face their do or die moment against the Peruvians?
I am not nervous anymore, to be honest. Joey, you know how you spoke about just being content and comfortable? It's just like whatever happens now is whatever happens now. But Tuesday is going to be an interesting day. Interesting to see what happens in the aftermath. So looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. It's going to be an interesting contest.
Something I've always, used on a personal basis. It's something to remind everyone else, like the pitch is always the compass. The pitch is always the compass. Everything else is noise. And I can't wait. I can't wait. It's going to be, however it goes, it's going to be, I'm really excited. Go Socceroos. Let's do it.
Well, what's the phrase? Like, the truth is on the pitch. Is that the phrase that it is? So we will potentially, I saw one of the comments asking predictions for the game. We will get to that with a very Xbox Live Call of Duty type username.
Under 2.5.
In 90 or over 90?
No. We'll get Ante to repeat his under 2.5, and we'll give our predictions at the end of the pod. You all have to stick around for that. But moving on, there is other things happening in the world of football. The Olyroos through to the semi-finals of the AFC Under 23 Championships. We have talked about this on the last show, not our last regular show, not the special that we did midweek about. Well, I did it. I'm trying so hard.
I know.
I'm amazed some of our listeners haven't started tuning into my commentary and just keeping a running tally of every time I say pass or something like that during the commentary. But Olyroos, we talked about it last week about how it's a bit of a weird tournament in where it sits in the future of Australian football, but it is a tournament. You are in tournaments to win. They're through to the semis. Should we be excited about the next generation, Ante Jukic? You've watched the games.
I guess on an individual basis, there are some, but this tournament only provides more evidence that Australian teams can't function with the ball. We had over 70% of possession, and Turkmenistan had better quality and more shots in the penalty area than open play in Australia. That is, and then you ultimately score from an own goal to go through. Like, that's embarrassing, man. Like, if that's not evidence of a need for improvement, then I really don't know what is.
All I got to say is we should be beating Turkmenistan by a lot more and also outplaying them. Like, if we've got 72% of the ball and we have 12 shots to 15, 3 shots on target. That's 15 shots to Turkmenistan, by the way. I haven't got the XG stats, Ante, but if you've
let me
got
get
them,
it
that
up,
would be
actually.
great.
Let me get it up.
Yeah, the meantime. Sorry, go on.
All right, I've got it here with me now. So a cumulative XG from 12 shots of 0.48. So that's a really low, average per shot in comparison to Turkmenistan's 2.02 from 15 shots. So, yeah, not good.
Jesus. Yeah, look, this is do we know who we've got next? Like, do we know who will play out of the two teams that are in the quarters? Sorry, I probably should have done a bit more research, but this is not great. Honestly, I didn't get a chance to watch the game last night, but just looking at the stats, looking at some of the outcry, and listening to what you're saying as well, we're not really surprised this is the case, that we had 72% of the ball and couldn't function in possession and couldn't create quality chances. There's a lot of good players in this team. Like, there's a lot of players who have big futures potentially. But God, we should be beating Turkmenistan by more. We're in the semis, cool. But like, when we play a better team, what's going to happen? Because we still haven't played the best of the best yet.
Well, the Olyroos will be playing the winner of Saudi Arabia versus Vietnam. Uzbekistan will take on the winner of the South Korea versus Japan quarterfinal. So they avoid Japan and South Korea.
So what? More than likely, we're playing Saudi Arabia because they won their group, just based off having a look at results. Vietnam finished second. I don't know. I'm just sort of I haven't seen anything.
Vietnam did force a draw with South Korea.
Yeah.
True. Okay, well, I guess we'll just wait and see. We'll see what happens on Wednesday.
They did also require a 91st minute equaliser to draw with Thailand's, but swings and roundabouts.
Well, if they show plenty of Aussie DNA, I'm sure that they'll have no problems winning the semi-final and are up for the fight against Saudi Arabia and Vietnam. They'll be fine. Just show the DNA.
Get in their faces.
Well, Antonis has left a comment here, and I'm going to bring it up because I have liked the look of him, J. Rich Begaloo, in some of the games that I've been showing. As I think I've put it in the chat before, guys. I feel for J. Rich Begaloo to the extent that he was turned into a bit of a meme by the Australian footballing public because of his utilisation, that thing again, in that game against Egypt at the Olympics. But he's playing for Accrington Stanley in England. He left Crystal Palace's academy in search of game time. He's getting it at Accrington Stanley, who are in League One. I think they were there or thereabouts in the promotion race. Ultimately, weren't promoted.
Mid-table in the end, yeah.
I think they looked close to the playoffs. But what have you made of J. Rich Begaloo, Ante or Nick, in the games that you've watched?
Solid.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely building blocks. I think he's a very physical defender. He's got great size. Like, he's the perfect Australian prototype centre-back that we like, big physical blokes playing in centre-back. But the good thing
interesting, him and Harry Suter playing next to each other.
Honestly, though, like, it's good that he's just getting games at a senior level now. Like, if it's League One, I know League One is not the greatest level, but it's games. Like, it's better for him playing there than sort of being in the Crystal Palace Academy. Hopefully he can kick on, because Accrington Stanley, I think even the season before that, they've been thereabouts in the playoffs race. So, if he can be part of a team that's somewhat successful in League One and actually is contesting for promotion, because those divisions, as much as it's a terrible standard of football, they're very hard to get out of, and there's a lot of tough games in there. So I think it might actually... Sorry, Joe, I know you're giving me that look, but League One is a terrible standard of football. But if he can get him...
Mate, my team plays in League Two.
Yeah, well, my team just got promoted from League One, so, sod off.
Your team's Milan. Your team's Milan,
well,
sod off.
If I had an English team,
in every league, bullshit.
Definitely, Wigan have... Not in every league, just two. But in that sense, look, it's good that he's getting games. and he's playing in the right position. Hopefully he stays in centre back. I know his junior career was as a striker, but he's been playing in Crystal Palace's academy as a centre back. Like, he's been groomed to be a centre back. Keep playing him there. We need more defenders. So as long as he can keep getting games, I'm sure he's going to put himself in a decent position.
Antonis wants to know your English team, Nick Dabano.
Wigan Athletic.
Big McManaman fan, weren't you? When he came to victory.
Hey, he was good at Wigan. Like, he was good in that 6 months when we got relegated. He was fantastic. He won best on ground the FA Cup final. Like, he was great. But then in the end, it saw what happened here. He couldn't last more than 55 minutes down in the A-League, unfortunately.
No, well, I'll move us on unless any of us have any further comments surrounding our under-23s coming through, and move us on to what does all the numbers on social media. It does all the clicks, it does all the retweets, it does all the likes. A-Liga player movements. We've seen a few moves. I have zeroed in on a few of the major ones, but we can bring up any that any members of this panel want to talk about. And indeed, if there's something that you in particular want to get our thoughts on, you can drop us a comment. But I think the first one, it's an intriguing one surrounding Perth Glory. Brandon O'Neill has cut his 3-year deal short after just one campaign and has signed with the Newcastle Jets. He's gone back to the East Coast, and he is not signed for Sydney FC, which I think took some Harborside fans by surprise. I'll go to you first, Nick Dabano. What's your thoughts on the situation?
Well, I was actually talking to AAP's own Perth's own Shane Hope about this at the Kangas game, because he was asking about, what's the deal with that. Seems like there's a bit of it seems like where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Like, he's a Perth boy, and there was such a big effort for him to get home. And I think, I'm not going to go into speculation, but he tore up a 3-year deal to go back onto the other seaboard and not go back to Sydney. I mean, going to play for Newcastle, it's a great coach to play under in Arthur Papas. It's a great system. But in terms of Newcastle signing him, I don't know if he's the kind of signing that Newcastle will be looking for to plug that hole in the middle of the park. I don't know if he fits this kind of football Newcastle want to play, considering he's sort of a ball retention, likes to circulate the ball, backwards passes, not really looks to progress the ball too much. But it is a bit of an interesting one. I didn't think he'd actually leave Perth this quickly. Like, if you asked me maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I would have thought maybe he would have given it one maybe normal year at Perth, and maybe under a new boss, maybe with some new leadership in charge of Perth Glory. But I found it quite interesting, Ante.
I get it, but I don't love it. Because ultimately he's probably an upgrade on, an Arques or a Grossos or an Altai, for example. But like you said, it's a matter of fit. I guess what I'm intrigued is to see, with a player like Brandon O'Neill, can an old dog be taught new tricks in this kind of system? Especially in this way, like, it needs significant amounts of repetition and rhythm. So I'm not sure whether they're going to. I'll put it this way: will the manner in which Newcastle play impact the way he likes to receive the ball and the way he likes to progress the ball from midfield? Yeah, like I said, I get it, but I don't love it.
I thought this would be a bit of an interesting comment, guys.
Oh, yeah. By the way, that was already done before that exclusive came out. So he had already signed for Newcastle before that whole, I want to come and see my, I want to, the whole personal reasons thing. And, that was, that was already a done deal. But I can provide a TNC exclusive that the Jets are looking for someone else from Perth. It's not a done deal yet, but they are looking, and it'll be interesting.
Andy Keogh coming out of retirement to play for the Jets. Wow.
Wow, what a signing, guys.
But I'll go to you first with the next one, Ante, involving a player going the other way from the eastern seaboard to the western seaboard. Mustafa Amini, former Socceroo, Borussia Dortmund starlet back in the day. I can see you being repulsed by my NRI hyping him up as we speak. But Amini has signed with Perth Glory. What do you make of that signing? He was treated with some excitement when he arrived at the Sky Blues mid-season, never really kicked on. How do you think he'll go at Perth Glory?
You get one contract in the A-League, you're good for another couple.
I can't argue with that. Nick DeBano.
It's a pretty, there's no real excitement about it. They were hyping up this intergalactic signing. I was expecting one of the guys from the UFO 11 to return. Yeah. And
Run the Memes informs us that Western Sydney Wanderers allegedly have found him. Hasn't been announced yet, so he's still locked up in some spaceship somewhere.
I think, look, it's an interesting one. I mean, doesn't move the needle per se. It's nothing, that's going to take Perth from bottom of the table back up the table straight away. It plugs a hole in midfield. At least they're signing some midfielders. Last season, they were fielding in midfield. I guess it's better than signing 10 fullbacks and playing them out wide and doing whatever the hell they were doing in midfield. But I want to talk about two things quickly about Perth in terms of some of their other signings. Joey, I actually want to ask you about this one in just a sec. But one of the players that I think is almost going to be like a new signing, but he's already on Perth's books when he comes back, is going to be Carlo Armiento. I actually was reminded about Carlo Armiento on my TikTok the other day because he's posting all these hype-up videos about him coming back from his ACL and doing all his rehab. He's doing these things in the gym of him doing the leg raises and with the physio and everything. It reminded me of, this is a real niche reference, and thank God Stoll isn't here. But I don't know if you guys remember this. I think it was SummerSlam 2007 when Triple H came back from his torn quad.
And that was well before 2007. That was 2003.
There was another one. There was another one, though. It was when he versed Booker T at SummerSlam. And I think he came back, and he comes back to this whole hype thing about him coming back. And it was I forgot what movie they.
Are you talking about his return at the Garden when he came out with the hoodie and the leather jacket?
No, not that one. Not that one. It was more.
Can you throw some denim on that?
No, not that one. Definitely not that one. It was. I think he tore his quad again. And they did this whole thing about repairing his quad. And they used some sort of RoboCop inspired promo for him before he came out. And he was doing all these run throughs with the battle ropes and pushing tires over and everything. And I thought Carlo Armiento's definitely taken a leaf out of that book. But in terms of individual quality, it's like a new signing getting him back, because I really like what I saw from Carlo Armiento pre-injury, especially 2 seasons ago. There was that one game in Geelong where he looked pretty damn good. But Joey, I want to ask you, Stefan Kolakovsky going to Perth, Comunicado Oficial. It looks like they're going to give him the keys to the castle as well, hopefully. And he's going to get quite a bit of scope with the number. I believe that if the rumors are
he's
correct,
going to wear number 7. He's going to wear number 7 and play on the right.
What do you think about this move for him personally, about, taking the next step in his career? Because obviously there's a much better chance that he'll actually see some minutes at Perth this year.
That's the most important thing, I think, for Kolakovsky. He had to play minutes. He wasn't going to see minutes at Melbourne City. He purely had to start seeing minutes, because there was a situation wherein if he went through another 1 or 2 seasons at Melbourne City, seeing the amount of minutes that he got, like you say, if you're good for one contract in the Liga, aren't you're good for another one, I really think he would have been in the NPL, back playing for Pascoval or something, had he stayed with Melbourne City the way things were going. Maybe if they get promoted to NPL 1. So no pressure to Josh Parrish and his mates. But most important, I think, is that he plays minutes. And from what I can tell, he is going to start. He's, going to arrive in camp. He's going to have to earn it in camp. Obviously, I think Zadkovic strikes me as the type of bloke that he's going to want to make all these young Archie Thompsons earn their spot in the starting 11. But he just had to play guard. I think it is when it was Comunicado Official in Melbourne City put up the farewell collar post and all of that sort of stuff. I thought it was, to use one of Ante's choice words, lamentable. Just the way the situation had played out. Like they talk about it, he went from a fan in the stands to their academy. I'm not sure how well publicized it is, but he suffered a pretty serious torn ACL in that academy and considered giving the game away. But he came back from that, was able to force his way into the team, was one of a number of youngsters that were really questioning their future under Warren Joyce. Stuck around, given a chance by Momberts, did a few things in his first season, ends up playing a key role in delivering his legitimate boyhood club. We like to talk about, fake clubs and all that in the A-League at the moment. This was his legit boyhood club. There was a legit connection there. Obviously acknowledging the role that Pascaval has also played in his upbringing, but he delivers them silverware and then he just runs into a brick wall. Just isn't played.
Sorry. A brick wall by the name of.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to go there.
Yeah. I think it's a shame that, they weren't utilised. He wasn't able to be utilised, because he's obviously, we saw, in that run to the Premiership and Championship when Melbourne City had no choice but to play him, we saw what he could contribute at an A-League men level, and that there was the ability to affect games at an A-League men level there. And it was basically, he was reduced to a human victory cigar in his final season at Melbourne City. I understand, you've got a lot of, main players there, and at least it wasn't quite Poochie areas, but it was just, I think what summed it up for me was grand final, Melbourne City are chasing the game. We went into exhaustive detail on Melbourne City's struggles to create good looks in that grand final. Melbourne City are chasing the game. I think they only made 2 subs in that game, if memory serves me correct. And Kolakowski, boyhood fan, bleeds the club, played such a key role in their Premiership and Championship the season prior. Just sat there on a bench in his big waterproof coat, not even sat on one of the actual fancy chairs that they have in the dugout there. He's sitting on one of the Bunnings plastic chairs, just watching. And the move to Perth was done before that grand final. So he's watching the final minutes of his City career, his boyhood club, his minutes with his boyhood club on a disposable plastic chair, watching a game that he probably felt like and probably could have affected in some way.
I will say his time at City was done after he went to play for North Macedonia. Because there was a lot that, when you think about how he came back, there was, not to play devil's advocate, but, Kolakowski didn't really put himself in the best position at the start of that season to really hit the ground running at the start of the season. And from there, he could never kind of work his way back into Kaznorbo's good graces. It is lamentable because this is a player who can affect games at an A-League level and, should be kind of given the scope. It's a tricky one. I think there's, there's a bit of column A and column B in terms of essentially being able to do more.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting you should have been starting over Jamie McLaren.
Yeah. But no, I'm not saying that. But I think ultimately, I think there was a sense of resignation very early on in that season from Kolakowski that he wasn't going to really receive any scope. And it just kind of avalanched from there. It's a shame. It really is a shame. Like, for one of, an instance where you actually do have a player with a connection to, this entity of Melbourne City. And for that reason, it does suck. Both on a personal and narrative level, if you want to call it that.
I guess the frustrating part is as well, like City had a lot of games in quick succession where they were playing 3 games in a week and he could barely get a sniff. Like I think he played only
Yeah.
3 times more than I just had it in front of me. He only played 3 times more than a half, like more than 45 minutes in the league. So he played 90 against Brisbane Roar and they played all the reserves. He played 49 minutes again in that 2-1 loss against Adelaide. And he played 74 minutes against Western United when everyone was on international duty. So it goes to show that his opportunities only really came when no one else was available and no one else was there. And I'm pretty sure that Brisbane game, if I've got my dates correct, was also during the time when Melbourne City had players on international duty with the Socceroos and they played Japan and Saudi Arabia. Absolutely. So during that time, most of his minutes, they're 10 minutes and under or 15 minutes and under.
Even
It's
go
like
all the
how
way
you-
back to the Melbourne City game at Amy, where they
Yeah.
played, Boss ahead of him. Like from there, you're thinking, what time he's done? Like if you're a player in that scenario and you have 2 fullbacks playing ahead of you on the wing in a scenario where you have, I think it's McLaren, Naboot, and Lecky were all out in that respect, and you have two fullbacks playing ahead of you on the wing. Like from there, you can either think my time here is done, or what do I have to do to prove this guy wrong? And it was geared more towards the former.
Well, I think we've spoken a lot on Collar and we are approaching 1 hour 45. So I'll get us on to some of the other moves. And a reminder, if you do have any particular player signing or re-signing that you want us to touch on, you can leave us a comment. But here's a non-new signing and a non-re-signing. The Milos Ninkovic saga rolls on. Sydney FC announcing that they were negotiating with Serbian press, reporting that Ninkovic had re-signed with the club, even though there has been no movement at the station, no comunicado oficial from Sydney FC. It is, well, if we didn't have the international break to distract us, it would be a remarkable situation, wouldn't it?
I don't know what the hell to believe now, guys. I really don't. Like, seriously, where's this coming from, you know?
As I said previously, I think the only winner in this situation is, even then it's a relative sense, the only winner in this situation is Milos Ninkovic because he gets another A-League contract to play on. Because, I don't think anyone wins here.
There we go. Nobody in the comments is coming through with any player signings. So any other player re-signings or player movement that has particularly caught your eye?
Did we go over Ibuski re-signing?
We
Adelaide?
did not. I know our Adelaide United fans love to hear your thoughts on Ibasuki's exploits and also Cloth there. But Ibasuki, Ante Jukic, the floor is yours.
I mean, look, it's all conditioned by who they keep in the midfield. And if they're going to keep Juan Dan Gisais, then Adelaide are going to play the same way.
Can I just add in some
balls into the box and
some
crossing inshallah.
Some signings and releases that I'm a little bit. There's a couple that I just want to quickly touch on. No, 2 releases. Sorry, Robbie Cruz from Melbourne Victory. We didn't speak about it on Tuesday. I really hope this isn't the last we've seen of Robbie Cruz in the A-League. I know he had quite a serious knee injury I think it was in March against Vissel Kobe. Obviously won't be at Melbourne Victory next season. I just hope that someone picks him up. I hope he gets another chance here in the A-League because I think it'd be good for him maybe go back to Brisbane. Like, I think going back home is something that I wouldn't be surprised if we see him, re-emerge at the Raw. But I think he's still certainly got at least a little bit left in the tank for at least one more season. Even if he's not, well, that's also the other caveat is how much money, obviously, is going to be put forward in terms of wages. Because obviously he's a free transfer. I think it would depend because I don't think you can rely on him as a week-to-week starter. I think he'd be someone who is probably going to be used off the bench and will be used in sort of the quote-unquote big games. But I hope we haven't seen the last of him. I genuinely think that there's more of him, more that he can give, and there's more that he could offer. Even as mentioned, Brisbane could do with a player like him. It would be good to see him play for the Brisbane Raw. As one of the wide players, if Warren Moon changes system and maybe goes to something more narrow, could play as a 10. If he even just deploys a 10 instead and plays with a second striker, it could be something to keep an eye on. So that was one that I'm a little bit disappointed we won't see him from a Melbourne point of view. Like, we won't see him in front of us every week, at Amy Park. But I hope that at least he's not lost to us from an A-League point of view. But just one other one I was very surprised about, just based off the awards night the other night at Western United. Jerry Scatardis released after winning Young Player of the Year at Western United. Now, I know he technically wins that by default because there weren't many other young players that are at Western United. I mean, Adisu Bayo, I thought was someone who could have won it as well. But like Jerry Scatardis was starting in finals. Like, I just found that interesting. Like, I thought, because they released Rene Kahin. I don't know what's happening with Neil Kilkenny.
They'll resign him.
Yeah. Well, he's not 100% sure if he wants to play on. So he still hasn't decided yet. But if they I would have thought that considering he won that award and that's a coaches and players nominated award, I would have thought maybe he would have gotten an extension, but something tells me he'll get picked up somewhere in the A-League. I think he will. I'm not saying that, it's a big loss for Western United, 'cause I think they certainly need upgrades in midfield. But I was just surprised. I thought that they kind of rated him internally.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't think it. Yeah.
Well,
I don't think it makes them any better or worse.
Well, we on Robbie Cruz. In the event that Robbie Cruz announces his retirement, we'll do a full segment on Robbie Cruz because he deserves it. He was that good of a player, and if you are connected to Robbie Cruz, let him know that we'd love to have him on the pod so we could talk ball with him because he is a criminally underrated player, and we would love to give him the forum to actually talk ball.
And an underrated interview.
He is.
He. You know what? I've always enjoyed talking to Robbie in that respect, and so
there we go.
Yeah, I will say, cheap plug. It was the first. Robbie Cruz was the subject of the first piece I wrote for ESPN during the 2019 Asian Cup. So it would be nice to get him on and have that,
full circle.
Have that sense of symmetry.
Yeah. Just one last thing before I want to throw it to you guys as well before we forget. Kai Rolls and Lewis Miller going to Scotland. What are your thoughts on the moves? Because obviously it's confirmed now, Rolls to Hearts, Miller. Well, Miller going from the Mariners, apparently signing for MacArthur, then going to Hibs. So MacArthur get the transfer fee. What are your thoughts on the moves, guys? Like just in terms of, I guess, player development, like for them personally, but also, I guess as well, the situation with MacArthur and Lewis Miller, like a bit of a Cam Devlin one there.
It's pulling a Devlin. Got to admit, I only heard the Miller bit because I got a text from Mario from Doncaster, but was the other one Kai Rolls, you said?
Kai Rolls. Yeah.
I think this pod has exhaustively gone into our thoughts on the Central Coast Mariners defense and our thoughts about the players associated with that defense. I think what we are truthers. I think we are the Dan Hall truthers.
A comment used by one commentator during a Socceroos game, we are gargantuan, guys.
We are, yes. Nobody listens to us. But no. Congratulations, Kai Rolls goes to Scotland. I mean, it's rapidly turning into the A Liga Scott. There's so many Australians heading to Scotland.
Is that now going to become canon? Like if you Google A Liga Scott, it's going to come up with the SPL.
What are they going to call it? The Vauxhall Lorry A Liga Men's Scotland,
Vauxhall Lorry.
Well, we'll have to get Young Boy on the show, and I'll tell you what. At some point during the coming off season, we'll get our resident Scottish football expert, Lockie Young Boy Flanagan, on the show. He can do HEA, RCS, what's it spell?
You can spell it, then
it is what it is.
Hearts, glorious hearts.
We'll it's get a Piadina, Johnny.
I want to get to a couple of questions before we start winding this thing all up. We've got two, so I'm going to go to the one with a high NRI first. The Homer legend asked, serious question: would Sturridge, if cheap, be a good pickup for a better resourced club like the Wanderers?
No.
Can't
stay on the pitch.
Yep.
Let's let him go play in the championship next season. Seriously, send him to the MLS. I know F the MLS, but they can have him.
I think it's. I don't think it always was, but I think it's now really transitioned to love the fame, not the game, with Daniel Sturridge. So yeah, and the other one was on the rumours of Costa Barbarouses to the Wellington Phoenix
for a third time.
Not on the wages he's been on at Sydney FC.
Yeah.
I think that's the interesting one. And to where? in that 4-2-2-2.
Because
They
it
got-
would be. They've already
they got
secured a Garkovic.
Yeah, they got 2 openings. I mean, Piscopo and Sandoval leaving opens up 2 spots on the wing. You think he's going to play? Well, would he play potentially as one of the 2 up top, or do you think could you see him playing out wide?
He, like, to be honest, he never worked at Sydney as one of the 2 up top. Like
That is the
just
question.
wasn't-
Yeah.
He's coming off a underwhelming stint at, what is it, Dyer
Yeah.
Arnie Ball. So now he's going to sign with Arnie Ball 0.
Oh, I remember.
I
using
guess-
that.
Well, I guess they've got Ben Wayne and David Ball still as strikers, so they're probably first choice. I reckon they'll sign another big number 9 to replace Big Gutty up top.
So they would need to
They'll play him out
hit.
wide.
If they go foreign, they would need to. There's no margin for error for that one.
Should be interesting. And anyway, moving on. Matilda squad out tomorrow for coming games against Spain and the Portuguese. I'm under embargo, so I can't say a lot, but did an interview.
Let's just leave it till after then.
Yeah,
well,
leave it to
just-
Tuesday. Leave it to Tuesday.
If you want a hint about what it looks like, look up my interview with Jack Sharkey for
Good stuff,
fellow
Joey.
ESPN
Well done.
podcast Beyond the Lead. I know I've also done a bit of a write-up on it. He gives a bit of an insight into what they're thinking on a high-performance level with this squad, and you should be able to read between the lines of that without me having to say anything. Moving on, guys. Look at this. I am a far superior host to Nick Stoll. 1 hour 55. We have gone less than 2 hours.
Hey Joey, we haven't actually
Stoll
mentioned
in the mud.
we haven't mentioned the elephant in the room. A stalemate this morning between our beloved nations.
That was
did
England's
mention
A
it.
team against Italy's C team, and they dropped the proverbial stinker.
And you had Peter Drury calling Davide Fratelli
Fratelli.
to play again. And I was losing it. Fratesi, mate. Come on. There's an S. There's no
man.
L.
The interesting thing about that actually was Mancini post game talking about Pellegrini, basically saying he's not a Totti, he's not a Giannini, but he can make a player out of him, because that was the first time from memory that he had played he started 3 games in a row for Italy.
Yes, correct.
I think it was like since 2018 or 17.
Mhm.
And for a squad that, a lot of that squad had seen less than 10 caps. So these 3 games, it's not great, but it's been positive.
That whatever they were thinking, putting Pellegrini and Pessina alongside Scamacca up top, like,
Bro.
oh my goodness.
Bro,
Like,
that's-
that was painful. But hey, shout out to my boy Freddie Katz in defense. Like,
Freddie
he's
Katz.
Freddie Katz, Federico Gatti. You know what? Like, he actually did all right. Like, Juve have got a good defender potentially in the works.
And Tonali did well too.
Of course he did. Of course he did. But Joey as well. No surprise England keep a clean sheet as well with Fakayo in defense as well. Like, no surprises that when you play Fakayo Tomori,
Big player,
you're
man.
better.
Big-
But England
Well,
haven't.
I would
England
just,
still haven't scored in open play in 3 games, Joey. What's going on? The wheels falling off, mate.
I would just say to Nick Dabano, congratulations. Yeah, 0-0 draw with World Cup bound England.
By all means enjoy it, but enjoy it by being fucking disciplined here.
Hey, would you start Tomori ahead of Slabhead if both were like fully fit?
You know my answer.
Yes.
You know my answer.
Yes, I would.
You know it's not going to happen. You know what's going to happen.
No
You know
way.
what's going
Won't
to
happen.
happen. Big game at the World Cup. Like, we're talking quarterfinals, and Harry Maguire gets
Quarterfinal
absolutely
against France.
destroyed.
Quarterfinal against
Kylian
France.
Mbappe makes him look silly, and
Speak-
Tomori's on the bench. And,
All right,
Bro, how average did France look without Mbappe, man? They stunk, man.
Are we surprised?
Freddie Katz.
Freddie Katz.
There
And
we
this
go.
guy was playing for Frosinone in Serie B last year, and he had Tammy Abraham in his back pocket. Where's this guy been?
I am going to wrap this up before we hit 2 hours because I need to have the bragging rights over Nick Stoll. Thank you, one and all, for joining us on another edition of the National Curriculum. We will be back on Tuesday at a time still yet to be determined. In the reaction, we'll either be beaming with Australia through to the World Cup or downtrodden with them consigned to watching it from the couch. Nick DeBarno, thanks for jumping on late as you were, having gone to your true love, the AFL. Ante Jukic, the mega powers from the top of the show. Thank you very much, boys. That has been the National Curriculum. I haven't hosted so long, I don't have a sign-off, so I'm just going to go to the outro music.
Go Socceroos!
Go Socceroos.
Arrivederci ragazzi!